The book of Exodus, chapter number 18, is where we'll begin this morning. And we want to continue the principle we began last week. I never did come up with a very intelligent-sounding title to it. And so we just have maintained maximize efficiency. And we dealt last time with the necessity of rest. I want to begin this morning to deal with the necessity of delegation. And some of the greatest stress and some of the least rest occurs because of being overworked. And the causes of that, I think, can in fact vary. Somebody will look and say, well, why is it that so-and-so is overworked? Well, some, it may be that they are driven by nothing more than egotism and a pride and their desire to succeed. There are some like that. I am not personally convinced that that's the majority of the cases. I know oftentimes that I've heard messages along these lines that it often seems to be that pride is at the root of all of this. I don't see that. I think that it may be for some, but I don't know that that's a fair thing to be able to say for all. There are others who are driven by what I have described as a tyranny of demands. It oftentimes seems relentless, and they're not doing these things necessarily because they don't possess the ability to delegate them. They're simply doing them out of a sense of responsibility and out of a sense of necessity. If you take a look around your own home, the reality is that there are more than likely projects that you'd be more than happy to delegate. You'd be more than happy to say, you know what, you do that, and you do that, and you do that, and you do. It doesn't work that way. Are you at home driven by that sense of pride and egotism that says, I have to do this? Probably not. But when it all comes down to it, there are certain things that have to be done. What do? Do you not just get up and do them? And sometimes it is done out of that sense of necessity. There are others that have a perfectionist mindset that has and strives to maintain high standards to the point that no one else is even able to achieve those standards. Oftentimes he's unable to achieve those standards himself. And we can immediately start to think of others maybe that we say, well, we've got that, so-and-so's a perfectionist. So let me just kind of hit the timeout button here and pause for just a moment, because the reality is that when we do something that in many ways we enjoy, and when we do it and do it well, is it not difficult to hand that over to someone else who may not do it to that standard? If you've been in management at all, there are certain things that have to be done well, okay? Heather, for example, is at Tractor Supply. Ideally, the product that the price is there is found directly above it on the shelf. Okay? You can't put this product's price here and the product on the other side of the store. It doesn't work that way. There's a certain standard that has to be done that way. And then there are certain ideas and there are certain things. And when you do it well and you enjoy doing it well, all of us will struggle with whatever those areas are to say, okay, here, you can do this. Just simply because it's something that we enjoy. Maybe it's something that we do have that kind of a high standard. Now, the reality is that it is difficult for us sometimes to hand something over, to allow someone to make mistakes, and allow them to be able to grow. Point of it is only to say this: we can go on and on and on with lists of causes for this type of being overworked. But regardless of all of the causes, we have to understand that all of them are detrimental. All of them are. Now, they may be detrimental to varying degrees. For example, the one who has the perfectionist mindset and is unwilling to let someone else make the mistake, what you'll find is that his mentality is detrimental to growth, because that person is never given an opportunity to be able to learn. Children oftentimes do not do things all that well the very first time they're asked to do something. You ask a young child to push a vacuum cleaner. Well, their concept of vacuuming and your concept of vacuuming are probably two entirely different concepts. Okay? They'll push it, and that's it. What about all that over there? Oh, it wasn't dirty. Well, there's one path that goes through and what they were doing is trying to just pick up all the little pieces of cracker crumbs or Cheerios, whatever it was that got dropped, and that's it. Give a young child some project to do in the kitchen, and they're probably going to burn things. They're probably going to mismeasure things. All of these are things that are a reality, but we have to allow them the opportunity to be able to grow. And sometimes it's very difficult for us to do so, but when we get focused on all of this, what we'll find is that oftentimes it's detrimental for the growth. We also find that the refusal to delegate things is damaging emotionally and physically. We're oftentimes very guilty of working ourselves into an emotional frenzy. It takes its toll mentally, it takes its toll physically and emotionally. As the stress increases, the fatigue increases. As the fatigue increases, the frustration increases. Before long, we begin to feel the effects of physical, mental, and even emotional fatigue. I don't know about you personally, but physical fatigue is, to me, one thing. The mental and the emotional are two entirely different creatures. When you don't have the life in you to be able to do it, it's one thing to be tired, sleepy, tired. It's another thing to be drained of everything that you've got, whether it's mental and emotional or whatever it is, and the light of life is not in that person's eye. That, to me, is far more challenging to deal with than it is to deal with the physical fatigue. Now, normally what happens is that when the physical begins to take place, all of the rest starts to take place. You can deal with being tired for a while. But when you deal with that constantly day in and day out, day in and day out, and there never seems to be an end in sight, what starts happening? Now you start playing the mind games, right? And then all of a sudden, quite honestly, you don't feel like going to work. And you don't feel like doing anything. Now, at that point in time, you've created a fatigue level on a whole nother level, okay? And you've pushed and pushed and pushed to this point, and now it's like, hey, what's the point in doing any of this? And that is, to me, something that's far more challenging. And the result of it oftentimes is a sense of being overwhelmed, a feeling of discouragement, and perhaps even depression. And the result is this person just is not even going to want to attempt things. In essence, he's spinning his wheels, throw up his hands in defeat, and oftentimes cry out, what's the use? What's the point in it? At that point in time, things are not going as they should. And we have to take a look and begin to examine the cause behind all of those emotions. What is it that actually happened? I think it's fair to say that God does not want us to live that way. God has designed our bodies with the need for rest. He instituted, as we saw last week, the 6-day work week. God also instituted random days off throughout the year. We call them feasts. Okay? Some of those feasts, they had lasted for a day. Some of them lasted for a week. My point of it is all to say this. God recognized that the body has to get away. The mind has to get away. The emotions have to get away from it all in order to function as you need to function. And the problem is inevitable when we attempt to do things contrary to how God designed us. You've probably heard the phrase, burning the candle at both ends. For years, I've thought that that meant you take one candle and light both ends of the candle. I was actually brought to a greater understanding of that, which makes a little bit more sense. Instead of lighting one candle at both ends of the candle, it's actually describing lighting it at both ends of the day. So you're lighting it in the morning, and you're lighting it at night. You're burning through your candle twice as fast. what's going to happen? You're going to run out of candle. Okay? And it results in, and it's a phrase that is used for excessive, long, tiring days. Early morning to late night. Constantly, day in and day out. Your body is not designed to do that. I've wondered at times if in my own life it's not a candle that I lit, it was instead a stick of dynamite that I happened to light, and just made a tragic mistake, and what I thought was this wick was actually a fuse, and it feels as though at times it's about to explode. The result of it, and the essence of that saying is to learn the balance of rest and work and strive to maintain it. Don't use up all your candle. We used a different analogy last time when we spoke about the individual who said, I've been given a horse and a message and I've killed the horse and I'm unable to deliver the message. And there is no candle. We have to be very careful with this. There are two examples in the Word of God that teach this principle of delegation, and I think God recognized that we would have the tendency to overwork ourselves, and He gave us examples of how to correct this very problem. And so I want us to begin this morning in the book of Exodus chapter 18. This one's in the Old Testament. The other one we'll not get to. It is contained in the New Testament as well. Exodus 18, when it begins, the scene is actually a rather touching scene. I don't know whether you ever thought about this or not, but when Moses delivered the children of Israel out of Egypt, his wife and children are not present. In fact, he had at some point in time, probably after the burning bush, and he had been keeping his father-in-law's tents or sheep and all of that there when that experience took place. And he had been married, had 2 sons, and probably when he left for Egypt, he actually had them stay behind. So for quite an extended period of time, Moses was separate from his family. So beginning in verse number 1, Jethro, the priest of Midian, Moses' father-in-law, heard of all that God had done for Moses and for Israel, his people, and that the Lord had brought Israel out of Egypt. And then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, took Zipporah, Moses' wife, after he, Moses, had sent her back, and her 2 sons, of which the name of the one was Gershom, for he said, I have been an alien in a strange land, and the name of the other was Eliezer. For the God of my father saith, he was mine help, and delivered me from the sword of Pharaoh. And Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, came with his sons and his wife unto Moses into the wilderness, where he encamped at the Mount of God, at Mount Sinai. And so the whole point of it is, it seems as though this was a rather planned reunion. Can you imagine the joy of that Moses would have experienced after being apart from his family for, by this point in time, a rather extended period of time? And so here comes his wife and his 2 sons, and he said unto Moses, verse number 6, I, thy father-in-law Jethro, am come unto thee, and thy wife and her 2 sons with her. And Moses went out to meet his father-in-law, and did obeisance, and kissed him, and they were asked each other of their welfare, and they came into the tent. And Moses told his father-in-law all that God had done unto Pharaoh to the Egyptians for Israel's sake, and all the travail that had come upon them by the way, and how the Lord had delivered them. They had a lot to talk about. They had a lot to catch up on. And as Moses and his family were finally reunited, they sat there and Moses began telling them everything that God had done. Imagine hearing those accounts. Imagine hearing from Moses, he did what to the Red Sea? Wow. This was all within, hey, 6 months ago. We're in that kind of a time frame that more than likely this all would have happened. Can you imagine hearing of all of the plagues? And even that Egypt actually sent them out with all of the silver and the gold and all the clothes, everything that they had? Verse 9, Jethro rejoiced for all the goodness which the Lord had done to Israel, whom he had delivered out of the hand of the Egyptians. And Jethro said, Blessed be the Lord, who hath delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians, and out of the hand of Pharaoh, who hath delivered the people from under the hand of the Egyptians. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all gods, for in the thing wherein they dealt proudly, he was above them. I don't know that Jethro ended up, let's say, that it was a believer or not, I don't know whether we can necessarily draw that from this statement. Moses, your God, is at least superior to all the other gods. Does that mean that he is exclusive? There's a lot of question there, okay? But nonetheless, it was pretty amazing to hear all of the accounts that had taken place. And so the Bible continues in verse number 12. Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, took a burnt offering and sacrifices for God, and Aaron came and all the elders of Israel to eat bread with Moses' father-in-law before God. Do you think they had a great time talking? Okay, and all the fellowship and everything that was there. Well, the next morning is kind of where we want to begin to center on things, because Jethro began to observe something that to him was very disturbing. The Bible says, verse 13, it came to pass on the morrow that Moses sat to judge the people, and the people stood by Moses from the morning unto the evening. And when Moses' father-in-law saw all that he did to the people, he said, What is this thing that thou doest to the people? Why sittest thou thyself alone, and all the people stand by thee from morning unto evening? And Moses said unto him, his father-in-law, because the people have come unto me to inquire of God. When they have a matter, they come unto me, and I judge between one and another, and I do make them know the statutes of God and his laws. Now, what he began to see and observe that following morning was Moses sitting and judging the people. Now, let me point out that Moses was responsible for that. This was part of his job. Jethro's solution is going to be to do this more efficiently. I recently had an opportunity to see a Christian production on the life of Samson, theatrical performance, and it was honestly a very enjoyable one to see. And there was a point, and I never really thought about, when it says that all of these different judges judged the people. You ever thought about what that actually entailed? I guess in my mind, I've thought of it in the sense of almost as though it's equivalent that they led the people. Here in this particular production, they kind of brought that concept to mind just a little bit differently, because here would come two individuals both fighting over the same sheep. You see? I've got to settle this dispute. Constantly. Can you imagine how wearing that would be? If you've ever dealt with people and their problems, if you've ever dealt with just feeling as though all you do is be an intermediary between two people who just simply can't get along. I wonder how many of the people were the same individuals. Oh, it's you again. Okay? In this process, why won't you just listen? Why can't, okay, you know what, fine. We'll cut the sheep in half. Half goes to him, half goes to him, and now we're done. All right, there's the solution. And the point of it is, when you talk of judging things, whatever dispute there was, whatever issue had come about, and they would come out of varying degrees. Some of them would be ridiculously petty. Others would be significant and would require much more time and energy and consideration in order to give a proper and fair judgment. You have to be sure that you listen to all of the facts. You have to have a spirit and a mindset that is alert and that is attentive to all of these things and looking for that level of discernment. Imagine doing this from early in the morning until late at evening. And this was what Moses was engaged in. We don't know how long he had been doing it, but this was what he was engaged in. And so Jethro asks him, okay, well, Moses, what is it that you're doing, and why is it that you're doing this alone? And Moses answered the question really very sincerely, beginning in verse 15, because the people came unto me to inquire of God. Now that's a pretty good reason, is it not? They came to me to ask of God, and so that's what I did. And then he begins to kind of explain it. When they have a matter, he says in verse 16, they come unto me, and I judge between one and another, and I do make them know the statutes of God and his laws. Now, was Moses guilty of pride here? I don't think so. Moses isn't driven by egotism and pride and says, I'm the only one who's competent to make this decision. Have you looked at those people out there, Jethro? Have you seen how intelligent they are? He doesn't do any of that. Moses was not guilty of pride. Moses was working out of sincerity, and he was working out of a purity of heart, and his desire was to help them come to a greater understanding of God and of what God's commandments are. Let me point out to you that oftentimes this feeling of being overworked is oftentimes the result of a sincere desire to meet the needs and do what is best. Now, some may be driven by pride, but I am convinced that many are not. I don't think that people wake up and say, you know what, I'm going to rest no more. I don't see that happen. It is possible, but I don't see that. But they find themselves in a situation that, to me, just sort of happens. Do you think that day one of camp, there was a huge line outside of Moses' tent? I doubt it. I don't think it started that way. My opinion is that the cases began rather slowly. A couple here and a couple there. Some would come and, hey, Moses, you're the leader. So-and-so stole my sheep. Well, just bring him here. We'll talk about it. 2 or 3, 4, 5 cases maybe in a day. And then word began to spread and troubles began to spread. And before long, a few more people would come. Before long, a few more people would come. And before long, a bunch of people were coming. Did Moses make some grand announcement in the morning that says, all of you with problems, come see me? I don't think so. I think what happened was that he found himself in a situation that just simply happened. And before long, the days became long and the lines became long. And it became more than he was able to bear. But Moses thought that what he was doing was best. Verses 17 through 23, we find several very important lessons regarding the excessive work. Notice what he says, verse number 17. Moses' father-in-law, this would be Jethro, said unto him, the thing thou doest is not good. Number one, excessive work is not good. It's not. It may seem like we're doing good, but Jethro's counsel here is exactly right. Excessive work is not right. The degree of work is simply not good. And it's, might say it on the flip side of it. I think oftentimes instead of describing what it's not, let's say what it is. It's not good. Let's say it this. It is detrimental. It's detrimental. It's detrimental in lots of ways, and he explains them. Number 2, excessive work is not good. Number 2, excessive work is wearing. He says in verse number 18, thou wilt surely wear away both thou and this people that's with thee. It's inevitably going to take its toll. It's going to take its toll physically, it's going to take its toll mentally, and it's going to take its toll emotionally. It was wearing on him as well as on those to whom he was ministering. This too would create potentially more problems. They would have individuals who would be standing in long lines all day long waiting for their cases to be heard. Now this could make his job potentially far more difficult. Now let's say that so-and-so has been waiting for hours in a line and he gets right up there and all of a sudden you close shop. Okay? You've perhaps experienced that. You've waited in a line to do something and right as you get there, they're no longer doing it. If you've been to an amusement park, more than likely you've waited in lines for the greatest and best ride imaginable, and you get right up to it, and it either broke or it's time to shut the park down. Okay? Wait, just one more? Okay? Or the cashier turns her light out at the store. It's like, really? You see, it's naturally going to create a little bit more of a problem. Now he's got a complaint that's directed towards Moses. Let's put ourselves into this situation, and geographically, this is a hot climate. It is a climate where there would be a lot of fatigue. And so now you put yourself standing in this kind of a climate all day long. Your complaints are going to become magnified. When we are grumpy, fatigue makes us grumpier. Okay, hungry makes us grumpier. We say we get hangry, all right? Well, what's happening? There are additional complications that are already starting to creep. The point of it is this. It's creating more problems. And somebody else may have a complaint with his neighbor. He takes a look at the line and says, oh my goodness, I'm not standing in this line all day long. I'll go solve that myself. Okay? You take my sheep, I'll go punch him in the nose. And take my sheep back in the process. And I forget this line. All of the problems that are going to occur. See the point?
Another problem that could occur here is you waited in line, you get up there, and you're irritated, and you have to wait in line, and the outcome don't go in your favor, or don't go the way
Yeah.
you think it ought to, and then you've got another complaint that you go out and say about.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. You get up there and you waited expecting justice to be served in your mind. By the way, justice being served means that they agree with you that you're right? Okay? That's normally our ideas of justice being served. And that you get up there and he doesn't. He doesn't side with you. Now there's an additional complaint that's there. I would wonder if, as the level of frustration occurs with standing in line, how accurate the facts of the case would actually be by the time they get up there. Okay? If you've sat there and stewed on something for a while, you know as well as I know that typically by the time you're dealing with it, it's been greatly embellished is a great word, and suddenly the facts are nowhere even to be seen. We've just added in all of this additional stuff. So number one, excessive work is not good. Number two, excessive work is wearing. Number three, excessive work is unbearable. Notice what the Bible says. This thing is too heavy for thee. Thou art not able to perform it thyself alone. Oftentimes we're guilty of thinking we can handle anything. Okay? As we age, perhaps, and go through different experiences of life and different doctor's appointments and chiropractor's appointments and all of those things, we start learning we can't handle everything. And we find that there are certain limitations, and we have to understand that we're incapable of handling things when they attempt to operate outside of God's design. Jethro was very clear, and he said, you're not able to perform it alone. Moses, you can't do this alone. Now, let me point out to you that Jethro did not leave with just the fact that Moses was not doing good. Okay? He instead offers a solution. Let me point out that the world is full of critics who sit on the sidelines criticizing all that is done or not done, decisions that are made or not made. But what we need are individuals who are willing to be a part of the solution and not just point out the problems. Hey, you need this. Get up and get it. It's rather simple. You need to do. Hang on, let me take another sip of my sweet tea. You need to do. You need to get that right there. The world does not need any more of those. Okay? Let me also point out to you, and it's, I think, very easy for us to point out problems and not have the mindset of working towards resolving them. It's easy to come up with statements that say, you should not do, fill in the blank. Or, you should be doing, fill in the blank. Let me point this out, that such statements cost nothing for the person making them. You ever thought about that? It costs me nothing to come along and tell you what you're doing wrong. Didn't cost me a thing. You shouldn't be doing this. You should be doing this. Hey, have you done? Why don't you do? You should. That costs absolutely nothing for me to say that. But those kinds of comments are oftentimes very destructive to the person who is receiving them. Are they intended as being destructive? No. But if you are already operating in a situation that is hopeless with seemingly no way out, those statements with no solution only add fuel to a fire that is already burning. They may be shared with great sincerity. But if they are shared and there's no solution, and that person is already feeling this idea of being overwhelmed and in a hopeless situation, to add to that by saying, you should not be doing this, or you should be doing that, or have you done, or are you doing, or what is this and what is that, all of those things only add fuel to that fire that is already burning, and it does great damage. It costs nothing for the person who is making the statement, but it is so damaging and so destructive to the person receiving the statement. We can put and magnify that to whatever degree we want. We can come along and we can simplify it to whatever degree we want. We can take it to a child who is just learning in the kitchen and is scolded sharply for not measuring something correctly and asked to leave the kitchen. You see what happens? They'll leave the kitchen. And their spirit was just destroyed by that. It can get taken on to a level at work where maybe an employee is not doing what he ought to be doing. And there is correction that needs to be given. And that's fine. I'm not saying that it's wrong to do that. But there has to be a solution. I've heard many times from many people, you just need to learn to say no. I've said this, and it is absolutely true because I personally have experienced it. What you mean is I need to say no to everybody else. Because if I say no to the person who's telling me you need to learn to say no, oh man, you want to talk about a fire? You want to talk about a problem all of a sudden? Well, you just don't care about me. My problems don't matter to you. Been there, done that. Okay? And the point of it is, well, it's okay to say no unless it's to me. Then it's not okay to say no. And we need to be very careful about this kind of a mindset. My point of it is to say this, though. Jethro came along and said, all right, Moses, what you're doing is not good. Here's a solution for this. Be a part of the solution. Do not be that person who just comes along and says, you know what, you're doing too much. Thank you, Captain Obvious. Okay? I can tell you that. You can say that about you. It's not something just me. You could take a look at your house and all of the projects that need doing, and someone can come along and say, well, you know what? You just need to not work so much so that you can do all this. Boy, that's a real simple solution, isn't it? Why didn't I think of that? I just won't go to work. I mean, yeah, and those statements, are they not made with sincerity? But how constructive are they? How helpful are they? What does it do to you when you receive that statement? Does it not want to just make you, in the spirit, of course, reach over and slap that person? Okay? And you do so spirit-guided, there's no doubt. I'm not advocating get in the flesh by any stretch of the imagination. But if you were to get in the flesh, you're like, okay, wow. Forget cutting my grass. It's time to bale my grass. Well, why don't you just leave work early to do it? Like, this is just some option. Folks, I'm sorry. I just picked you up. I know we're on our way to Carowinds for the day. I need to stop here and I need to cut my grass. Guys, I'll leave the motor coach running. The air conditioning will be fine. I think it should help, but I just need to cut my grass. It doesn't work that way. People ask this and they ask it sincerely. Can't you just say no? Well, I'm not saying yes for the fun of it. I'm not saying yes. Oh, man, that's an all-night trip? Yes, sign me up for that one. That's the one I want. You see, we don't think sometimes. My point is to say when we are not thinking and we make these kinds of statements, it costs nothing for me to say to Cecil, you need to cut your grass. Okay? I don't even know if you do. My guess is you probably do. I can say that to him because I've been to his house enough times. He can say it to me because he's been to mine enough times too, all right? It's amazing where grass grows. It's amazing where it's not supposed to grow, but that's beside the point. Okay? I can say that. Did it cost me anything to say that? No. What did it do to him? He's already, when you pull in and you open your car door and the grass just opens with your car door, okay? Everybody says, well, just cut it. You don't think? Okay? You walk out in your dress clothes and you get all those little, the seeds off the grass that sticks to your pants, okay? Or your dress shoes. Oh, yeah, it's great. This is, well, you just need to cut your grass. Yeah, keys in the mower. My point is to say this. We've got to understand. We have to understand how those statements, even though they're made with sincerity, are oftentimes extremely destructive. Because the statement isn't, hey, I know you need to get your grass cut, and I know you've been working a long time. Can I come cut it? You see? And Cecil's going to say, no. Only I can cut my grass, because when I cut my grass, it's going to look like a golf course. Okay? Keys in the mower. That's my point. 2 mowers. So it can even be a tandem wife, husband-wife tandem. My point is to say this. It's easy to say this because it costs me nothing. But when I come back and say, can I do this? There's the solution. And there's the statement that finally takes that pressure off and says, yes. If you're one to sit around and point out all the problems, let me kindly say to you, shut your mouth until you come up with a solution. Because you're doing more damage than you are good. It's easy to sit there and say, let's take a fellowship, for example. You need more forks. Get up and get them. It's not a complicated process. Okay? Oh, man, sure would be nice to have a napkin around this place. Get up and go find one. Okay? And it's easy to fall into that trap. But we have to understand, for the one who's on the other side of that fence, who has worked tirelessly and is exhausted and is battling that feeling already of being overwhelmed, all that you're doing is pouring gasoline on a fire. And that fire is going to explode. Grant? Yeah. Yeah, I've considered putting up about a 10-foot tall fence with concertina wire going around mine so that when I need to cut it, you know what, I'm the only one who knows about it, because it's obvious that needs do, or that kind of thing needs doing. I think we need to take a look at how we handle these things. Jethro's going to come along and give some great pointers on delegation. We'll explore these a little bit later on, but I want to mention them briefly, and then I'll pick this back up next week. Delegation does not relinquish responsibility. I don't delegate something so that I don't have to deal with it. That's one of the biggest misconceptions that there is regarding delegation. You're still responsible for it. When it's all said and done, guess who is accountable to God for the things that go on in my home? Me. I am. Now, that's not a very encouraging thought. When it's all said and done, who's responsible for the things, who's accountable to God for the things that go on in this church? I am. It's end of story. And I can delegate something, but it doesn't relinquish the responsibility. We'll talk more about that later on. Delegation is to qualified individuals. Here's a harsh statement. Just because a person is willing doesn't mean he's qualified. Lots of people are willing, but they're not qualified. I have 3 daughters, 2 of whom are getting older. Well, actually, all 3 of them are getting older. That's kind of a stupid statement, but besides that, 2 of them are willing to drive. Only one of them is qualified. Okay? They are both willing, but they are not both qualified. And sometimes that gets to be a rather harsh thing. Delegation is designed to create a system to maximize efficiency, and then we'll also see that delegation is the key to endurance. And it's tough. It's very difficult. And there are a lot of things that have to get weighed into this. And you can sit there and say, well, why don't you just have so-and-so do this? Well, when so-and-so is working 60 or 70 hours in the course of a week, how do you ask so-and-so to do it? You know, when so-and-so can't physically do it, what are you supposed to do? When so-and-so doesn't have the ability to do it, what are you supposed to do? Well, that's when you just hire it done, right? Well, it'd be nice to hire somebody to do a bunch of work at my house. What's the one limiting factor? Money. So now what do? There are no easy solutions there. So you just got to do it. To what extent? No food? No gas in the car? I mean, it's easy to sit on the sidelines and criticize. Costs nothing. You want to be a part of the solution, and that's where we need to be as Christians. Let's pray and we'll be dismissed. Lord, thank you for this time.